Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through two stories talking about the possible coalition and headwinds building against the U.S. economy. And what I mean by that is the tariff policy and the leader of the U.S. economy, or at least of the nation itself, Donald Trump. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. That's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our daily debate. Can you see the U.S. recovering from this U-turn that we have made on the trade policy when it comes to the tariffs that Donald Trump wanted to implement? President Trump was adamant that this was for the long haul. His advisors were more the ones out there saying it was for the long haul when it came to Navarro or Ludnick. And then you have your Bessents and you have your Hastens that wanted to go out and make a different message, which was this is a negotiating tactic that stay calm. We're going to bring people to the table. We're going to work things out. Well, now some of those people that wanted to be brought to the table, one of a former PMs in Britain is making some different comments, and Larry Fink from the U.S. is also talking about how the BlackRock name is diversified. It's not just in the U.S., it's all around the world. So do you see these possible changes in approach from other nations and other actors and large independent financial agencies as a warning sign that maybe the focus needs to go other places besides the U.S. when it comes to economic involvement and economic development? So with that, throw your comment in the comment section. Let's actually get into the first article. I'll pull a few quotes from both of them. Honestly, it's more of a synthesis of an argument compared between the two of them rather than reading one than the other. So the first one comes from The Guardian, and the headline reads, Gordon Brown calls for economic coalition of the willing to tackle Trump's tariffs. And to be honest, when I first read this article, I was a little skeptical. I say this because there is a lot of posturing from places like the UK, but do they have the economic weight, especially now that they are not part of the European Union? Do they have the economic weight in order to tell the U.S., hey, you need to back down here? Now, when they were part of the EU coalition, maybe you could say that bloc itself had enough. But Britain, not necessarily the largest producer of goods. They're a service-based economy. They have a large financial sector. So can they actually boss the U.S. around? Not necessarily, but that doesn't mean that their calls, upon further review of the article, that doesn't mean their calls for an economic coalition can't be harmful to the U.S. in the long term. Quote, Brown said world leaders must also be wary of China's position, saying Beijing should be reminded that it was, quote, in its interest to focus more on expanding domestic consumption than flooding the world's markets with cheap goods. But he warned, quote, this means we may need to synchronize reduction in interest rates, an initiative the U.S. might well join, backed by fiscal activism in countries where there is space to expand. And this is saying we need to take advantage of these different markets that we're not actually looking at currently. We need to move our supply chains, move our focus away from the U.S., not necessarily centralize currency there, and also find ways to encourage extra spending that's not necessarily debt-related, lower interest rates, and actually provide more places for people to produce their products. And this is a strategy, if done across the entire world, which they're not going to have that large of a buy-in, at least not yet. It will take time to get there. That is a strategy that could very well alienate or at least hurt the U.S. And Brown, though he is not in the PM's chair right now, he's not the most influential man. It is scary to see that when you have it in, I would say, in consort with this next article that we have that comes from our friends at Business Insider. Headline reads, BlackRock's Larry Fink has a global and optimistic worldview even as Trump upends the international market. And I want to focus on one quote in particular, and then there's a little bit of an expansion on it for the second part. Quote, BlackRock is a global firm, but one that operates hyper-locally. This is said by Larry Fink, by the way. Quote, we are Mexican in Mexico, Canadian in Canada, among other countries and nationalities, Fink said. And you may be thinking, why is this important? One, I think the language itself is funny, maybe less than important, but it's funny. Oh, we're globally active, but hey, we're hyper local. That is some of the best talking points a PR firm gave him, honestly. But the overall arching point that he's getting at here is that we do not just operate in the United States. We are expanding our footholds in other countries. We are expanding our asset portfolios in Mexico, Canada, in the EU, especially as the EU becomes the safe haven right now, with the US dollar being a little bit weaker based on the selling of large segments of the bond market last night. So, why are both of these in concert a problem? It is talking about the largest, I repeat, the largest asset holder in the US economy, BlackRock, who, remember, where BlackRock goes, State Street goes, as well as Vanguard, because they all have shares in one another. They all have about 20% ownership of one another. It's very interesting how that works. But the point being that where they go, aka not in the US, focusing on other countries, other asset classes that may reside outside the United States, specializing in these other economies, the more you see drawdown from the US. And that's not to imply that the US is necessarily going to be worse off. You can hire people in the US and you can hire people in Mexico and Canada. It is not necessarily zero sum, especially if, like BlackRock, you are continuing to grow, get more assets under management, more accounts, so on and so forth. I'm not implying it's a zero-sum game, but with messaging like this and also the focus on expanding overseas, it shows that there may be a strategic plan, a strategic initiative to make sure that they are not all held up in the United States, that they're diversifying beyond the United States. And in concert with a comment from Brown talking about how we need to build an active coalition against, or at least that does not rely on the United States, it does not bode well. It looks as though people have seen this tariff policy snafu. They've seen not only that, but also the current trade war with China. Even though Trump backed down on some of the other tariffs at other locations, other nations, and is saying he wants to work out deals, China is still on his hot list, essentially, and he's still going after them. And guess what? Other countries, just as much as they rely on the US, they also, most countries, if not directly but indirectly through their supply chains, also have interest in China. So you can see here that the question of whether or not China is going to subsume the US's position, whether or not the trade war between the China and US is going to hurt everybody else, the question remains, is the U.S. the safest place to do this? Is Donald Trump, is President Trump a stable leader? Is he going to pull out plans like this before? Is he going to continue to escalate this trade war in order to not back down? All these questions leave people wondering. And though the ripple effects will happen no matter what across the world economy, if you can diversify away from the United States, if you can ensure that the United States is not where you're holding all of your assets, you're not just focusing your business there in the United States, then you can ensure you're prepared for any instability. You can actually pivot moving forward. And it looks as though people are starting to question the place that the U.S. has. And this honestly started after the SWIFT banking system. We remember during the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war, we kicked, and I say we kicked, there was a joint decision, but we essentially pressured the SWIFT banking system to not include Russia, which in turn means they didn't have necessarily the same access to the banking platforms that we have here in the West. And this was seen as a sort of sanctions, and how should I put it kindly, as economic coercion. And these sort of moves, us using our weight in order to get what we want and throwing it around haphazardly, often leads to lack of confidence in our country, and therefore our economy, and therefore our currency, and therefore our markets. And I think that this is a serious conversation. We're going to see more people come out, especially those who just hate Donald Trump anyway, who can't stand the man simply for existing, which is not necessarily fair. I think it is fair to say his tariff policy and his haphazard nature with it definitely deserves criticism. And if I was an investor myself, I would be reevaluating. But just because they don't like him doesn't mean it's a good reason. And he has seemed to pivot. He has chosen the right policy, is the way I would put it. He's saying we're going to lower some of the tariffs. Then again, he still has a 10% up, but that doesn't matter. No matter how much you can say, oh, well, he chose the right policy, he's on the right track now. Even if you and I agree on that, even if you and I think that the tariffs were bad and that he needed to not actually go forward with them, it doesn't matter when it comes to stability of markets. They still look at this situation and say, oh, he chose the right policy, but he had an inkling of choosing the wrong policy. He still has those 10% tariffs up, and that could lead to further decisions in the future that hurt all of their interest. So keep watching these 100%. I think they will be interesting. The story links specifically to these two from The Guardian and Business Insider will be linked in the description below, that like and subscribe button. So you can go read the full thing for yourself. You can get a little bit more insight, more expanded knowledge on both of them. But I thought it was more important to synthesize the two, honestly, which means I spent a little bit less time deep diving each one individually. So with that said, let's jump into our Daily Delight. This one comes from the Daily Bunny, and the headline reads, "Exhausted bunny face plants into a nap with her besties." And the photo is absolutely adorable. This guy just tuckered out, boom, straight straight down. And I'm pretty sure his friends or her friends don't actually appreciate being used as pillows, but I'll tell you now, the photo's adorable. And if you want to have a smile on your face, that link will also be in the description below, the like and subscribe button. It will be labeled Daily Delight, so you can just go look at that, maybe share it with some coworkers, and make everybody's day just a little bit brighter. So with all that said, if you want to check out the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, all the links will be down there in the description. Also down there, you can find the Twitter handle at @YourDailyFlip, where I post links to all of the episodes on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 and 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less, international news. And on Monday, Wednesday, Friday is these sort of episodes, 1-2 articles, 10 to 15 minutes, really trying to get at domestic issues and U.S.-focused stuff. Sometimes it's economy, sometimes it's tech, a lot of politics recently, especially with how Trump's been taking up all the air in the room. But with all that said, I think you get the point. So there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.